Hello and welcome to dungeonmancerslmc, a limited morality company. Today, we're going to put our money where our mouth is. We've got a new product coming out, the 1 hour, one-shot worksheet, where we go through all the aspects that you need to create a concise and fun adventure. Before we dive in, let's introduce ourselves. First, we've got the man, the mystery.
Boulder.
Boulder, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I pick up heavy things. I like to pick up heavy things. That's what I do. I grow a beard on occasion. Those are the quick, simple facts.
And next, we've got another beautiful, insidious individual.
It's Lord George, the inevitable former ruler of the dark lands of Alcathal. I'm here now to help promote inclusivity in the Dungeons & Dragons community.
All right. He's a man reformed. And I am Mick Daggers, the minstrel of madness. And my general motivations are going out, spreading my music to the world, and just causing a little bit of chaos. And finally, we've got our man.
Salem, the Witch King of California. I enjoy putting tattoos on my body and keeping things weird. I have a passion for creating things mysterious and nefarious. And I'm excited to be here.
Right, fantastic. So, we made a promise. We're going to run through our 1 hour, one-shot worksheet. So, Lord George, kick it off.
All right. You know how we start these things off. The thing that holds a story together, the stitching to the shirt, it's the theme, you know. The theme of your adventure or campaign is what holds everything together. It's just a reoccurring idea that will act as a compass when it comes to writing and role-playing for your story. And the rest of my villainous friends will expand on this a little bit.
Yeah, to start off, we live in some downtrodden times. It's good to have a little bit of joy in your life. So good spot to start for that is something a little bit more lighthearted, jovial, heroic.
Yeah.
All right. So something a little bit lighthearted, something especially for maybe newer players or players who have very limited experience in the tabletop D&D world. I think it's good to ease them in to a story, and if they're at low levels, you may not want to have the most daunting task before them, because that will cause their incipient deaths. So having something lighter might be helpful.
Absolutely, because one of the biggest problems I find with new players, especially like if we're picking jovial, like if you make everything very dark and very like macabre, new players are going to jump into everything expecting it to be like a dangerous combat-oriented situation because they're not going to understand really that role-playing is a huge part of the game, and that can often lead to a full TPK in like session 1, which is not fun for new players usually.
A good thing to always have is having fun NPCs, people that they can talk to that are interesting characters and have that little bit of nice character atmosphere to them, make them want to interact.
I think also comedy is just such a good way to break the ice with new people. It's a lot easier than just diving right into like some really dark, yeah, you know what I mean.
No, yeah, I agree, because, you know, I mean, you could always start everything with, like, the Lich has destroyed an entire city, but sometimes it's more fun when it's, like, a bunch of goblins are up to no good in the old, I don't know, you know what I mean? You know what I mean? Like, it's, yeah, the fun can really draw people in a way that's constructive to your narrative.
Well, and your theme is kind of like your color palette. You decide before you go up to the canvas, you decide what you're going to, what kind of mood that you're going to invoke. The next thing that you have to get to is the setting.
Right, and the setting is just an amalgamation of all the themes that you've chosen for your adventure put all together. Like Medaggers was saying, each piece of theming is the color, and the setting is the entire painting. And looking at the worksheet here that we created, we've left a few lines to write about your setting.
Yep, and that's how part of the worksheet is. We have a space open for you. It's the very first thing to really concisely and quickly get your thoughts together as you're putting together a one-shot, which sometimes happens as a DM. You really have to throw something on the paper. So that's what this tool is for, is to help you get it out there and put it in an organized way. And actually, Boulder, you mentioned this earlier, NPCs, it's very much a part of your setting and your theme, because, you know, they are, when your player characters aren't interacting with one another, you have to have something that they can interact with, and NPCs is a very strong tool for that.
And, you know, some great NPCs if you are trying to have a little bit of a nice, fun atmosphere. Halflings. Everybody knows that halflings like to just have a good time, party, and live life to the fullest. You know, so, you know, having a halfling village or just a large halfling setting can lend itself very well to this.
I think for new players, going off of that, for new players, try and keep the initial sessions familiar, at least. That's the only word I can think of. I think that halflings are halflings, humans, dwarves, that sort of thing. Halflings are a good choice, and one that I use a lot, I think, because people tend to really think of the Shire in Lord of the Rings, and a lot of people come to D&D conflating D&D in Lord of the Rings for obvious reasons. So starting off in a halfling village, it can really sort of feel like that humble beginnings, classic adventure start that a lot of people are familiar with.
Mm. And through the lens of this jovial, lighthearted, heroic theme that we've got, we have a setting that we decided on. It's a halfling village called Wine Water, and to kind of give it that little bit of spice, as it were, we decided that we're going to have a wine harvest festival, something that players can kind of attach to as far as like a significant event, and that really sets a tone for it being something special that's about to happen. So next, you've got your place, you've got your theme. What about that hook?
Yeah, why do your players want to go on the quest that you're giving them? What's in it for them? What hooks them on, you know? Is it a giant bank full of gold that's free for them to loot as much as they want if they kill a dragon or something? Or is it just a unlimited supply of wine?
Right, and
sorry, go ahead.
I mean, first level party, a bunch of new people, everybody likes, you know, drinks are a good way to like even out everybody, make them relax a little bit. You know, you're gonna have a competition in a festival, and they're gonna get some free, you know, you're gonna tell them some free wine's gonna be won. That is something that everybody will be interested in, honestly.
Absolutely, real life and D&D.
Sorry.
No, I was going to actually ask you, Salem, what makes this hook interesting for you? Because you know you were a big motivator for when we were writing this.
Okay. I think, like Boulder said, the prospect of free wine. I mean, not only is that bragging rights amongst the other party members that, I mean, you won the competition. I think that it's a healthy and fun reward on top of anything they can find along the way that isn't going to be incredibly, like, in case this is a one-shot, you know, it's bragging rights at that point. You're not just giving them some, oh, here's a bunch of gold that you're never going to spend because it's a one-shot. It's like a thing, you know, but if in case you do continue with the adventure, I mean, it could come back in a meaningful way at some point, or yeah, it's just like some healthy, fun competition, not incredibly game-altering in the long run, but still fun. And then, you know, I mean, because I feel like a lot of new DMs especially tend to want to give out powerful magic items and kind of jump the shark on that. So this isn't giving your players an abundance of gold or equipment or anything like that too early on, because, you know, session 1. But it still leaves opportunity for stuff to be found along the way. It's kind of where I was thinking with just like a little competition in a village.
Yeah, and you're I think with this one shot specifically, but for a campaign as a whole, you want to bookend. Excuse me. You want to bookend the idea of rewarding your players. So your hook is going to be your initial bookend, and then we'll talk a little bit more about rewards later on. But with your hook and your theme and your setting, you've got your big map, right? Something that's crucial, especially with the one shot, because you're such a distilled version of a story. Your starting location is going to be the very first thing that your players really recognize about your story.
Right. Your players have to meet somewhere, and most of the time it's a tavern. You know, the most commonly used starting location for Dungeons and Dragons is the classic tavern, and because it works so well, you know, your characters can be drinking, getting a little warmed up to each other. You have a chance to introduce them to all sorts of different people. But we're taking it in a little bit of a different direction for our one shot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Since starting in a halfling village, obviously everything is going to be sized for halfling individuals. We decided to, with a amphitheater, it is very comically, you know, jovial, lighthearted. Everything's tiny. If you got some big players, this is a chance to really, you know, show that off.
And also too, with the fact that everything being like comically small size, we thought a fun spin on this idea would be that maybe your larger characters are actually being made fun of because they are so large, and these things are so like tiny in their hands. They're like, you know, you have a halfling champion come up, he's like, oh, what, you can't ride your chariot, what's wrong with you, you big oaf, you know, something like that. We thought, yeah, they can be superior in strength, and that can be a highlight, but also it can be a detriment depending on how you want to spin it. So the world is kind of your oyster as far as that.
Right, and I think we talked about it before, in this starting location, having a bunch of different contests going on, since we're at the wine festival, like you mentioned, chariot racing, or maybe coin flipping, anything, you know.
Yeah, and that kind of brings us to the next aspect that is linked to your hook. It's going to be your catalyst, and that, while it may be kind of like well, I'll let Lord George explain. He's so good at it. Please, Lord George.
Thank you, McDaggers. Right, you know, the catalyst, what they have, the hook, they know what's in it for them at the end, but what gets them going, you know? Does their god send them that divine message saying, now's the time, turn left, not right? Or does someone burst into the amphitheater saying, oh man, we got some gnolls running into town? What is the catalyst? You need it to start the players off, get them going.
One that is quite good to utilize are, especially at low levels, are kobolds, which we are using in this specific one shot. That Salem had a really good idea utilizing these kobolds here.
Yeah. So the idea we kind of brainstormed was that, you know, I mean, you go through all the competitions, you build up that kind of healthy relationship between the player characters with that. they're doing all the different events. We picked an event that kind of represented each of the ability scores so that everybody would kind of have a chance to succeed in their own way to really kind of thrive on the table, potentially. And there's no better way to endear your players to going up against a bunch of creatures like kobolds than to have the kobolds steal their hard-earned trophy, which in this case would be some of the wine. So having, the players get up on stage, accepting their reward, they're bowing, people are throwing roses, I don't know, celebrating, everyone's celebrating. And then the curtain rolls back, it's empty, and you see a bunch of kobolds barreling out of town with a cart with like the big wine cask on it, and they're laughing and pointing fingers at them. It's a really good way to get the players kind of involved in what's happening, because it should be at least their reward. They have the most like attachment to it out of anybody there, and players hate it when their stuff is taken. That is true from the newest players to the oldest players. So it is a really good way to get the players involved in what's happening, basically.
Yeah, and I think that's actually the essence of the catalyst. And like I said, your hook and your catalyst are intrinsically linked, but the motivators for catalyst is actually what's coming from the players themselves. Are they angry? Are they jealous? Are they pious and their god demands it? It's kind of it's the hook, it's the motivation on a much more individual level. And I think that's what makes the difference. Is like your hook is your adventure intrigue, and then your catalyst is going to be your player to player to player intrigue. And so keeping that in mind and knowing your players is such a big important part of this, that's what's going to get them to bite the line, as it were. You're going to have to put something on it, and then you're going to have to dangle it in front of their face. And you as the DM, you're going to have to decide how you're going to do that for each of your players.
Yeah, it has to work with everyone, because not everybody is going to be the wine-hungry town drunk character that's in it purely for the wine. That you're going to have the paladin that needs his own reason to want this trophy or the pile of gold, whichever it is.
Yeah, and so the best kind of way to do this is you have to know the elements of your story, and you have to get down to the nitty gritty. So we wanted to address that by talking about getting from A to B, your adventuring logistics.
Right. In a low-level one-shot like we're building right now, you might choose not to have any encounters along the way from your starting location to the dungeon or whatever end goal that they're heading towards. Instead, you might have a puzzle on the way, or just something that starts some role play with the characters. And we decided to go with
a little bit of a competition. We chose different competitions that are going to represent each of the ability scores. So your constitution, your dexterity, strength, charisma, intelligence, and your wisdom. You want to go into that a little bit, McDaggers?
Sure, yeah. So, like I said, we wanted to have contests that represented the different ability scores. And we started with Con. It's a festival of wine. What better way to start than a drinking contest? And I think we want to start this one because it's funny, first of all. And second of all, especially if you lean into the drunk condition, it's going to affect the rest of your competition. So it really does open it up for comedy. It makes your characters think on their feet, depending on what condition they start the rest of the things with. So drinking contest. Then we did a cask bridge crossing. So they have to run across floating casks in the river. Grape wrestling for strength. We thought that would be a lot of fun. You have a big vat of grapes that typically you'd press the grapes down to make wine, but why not wrestle in it? That's a fun thing to do. For charisma, we were like a dance competition that we thought that would be hilarious. And having your players describe their dancing is a good way to open up RP as well. You want to be able to give them a chance to use not only their character sheets, but use their wit too. And then we move on to heard it on the grapevine. And you can interpret this a lot of different ways, but we're thinking you could take trivia about wine, or you could use their intellect scores, and they have to remember the history of the area of wine water. And then the last two things we do is, so we were challenged by this one. This is the wisdom one, and for contests of ability, that can be a challenge. But we went with a thing we affectionately called wine swine, which is going to be tracking down a pig with the different conditions, like you're out in the woods or you're running through a vineyard, and you have to use your survival and your animal handling. We thought that would be a good way to address wisdom. And finally, we thought, well, we've talked about all the ability scores. We want to end with something that's going to really utilize our players' creativity. So we thought, why not have a downhill derby? You're drunk from doing all these festival things all day. And what's funnier than players falling down a hill and with style and pizzazz? So give your players an opportunity to use their specific skill sets that they've built their characters for, use their imagination, let them make crazy plans to win this downhill derby. So those are the kinds of logistical things that we thought might be able to make our festival more engaging and more exciting. So, Salem, yeah.
Oh,
please talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, no worries. I'd like to bring up, before getting into any more, like, talk about that sort of stuff, that these two items on the form are flipped than what they might usually be. Simply because the catalyst in this instance is happening after the festival. So this section I found to be kind of one of the most varied and difficult to really peg down, just in terms of where it's going to show up. But in terms of like what it's going to be, it can also be pretty varied. Generally speaking, this section is saved for kind of your moving from starting location to what I'll just call the dungeon, or whatever encounter or event you're going to have happen. This is the moving from A to B. That being said, in this instance, we use this section because a good portion of the kind of pre-dungeon is the contest itself. And I think we all pretty much agreed that for level 1, you're generally going to want to stay away from random encounters between your catalyst and your dungeon in totality, just because having the players expend any of the resources before any combat is a really, really good way to get them dead fast. And you should be, in a general sense, avoiding getting them dead quickly. Getting the players... I mean, you want to offer up a fair challenge to your party. It's no fun if you're just killing them right away. So, but I'm not going to get too much into that in this segment. But yeah, so the logistics, we just wanted something that really embodied kind of our setting, the fun, and our themes. Yeah, the fun, the joviality, what kind of makes up a halfling village. And we found that like a lot of these pretty traditional games in a lot of areas really kind of embodied what we were looking for here. If that is what you're looking for, unless I'm missing.
No,
what
absolutely.
you wanted.
Well, logistics are going to mean a lot of different things. It's all dependent on your story.
Right.
And for us, we wanted to address what makes the festival special to us as DMs if we were to run this story.
Yeah.
Because we think those are going to be the most intricate parts. Like when we get to the adventure proper, it's going to become a little more intricate. But we didn't want just to pass over the idea of this festival, because we thought that's what's going to be fun for the players and engaging. So addressing those logistics specifically, we thought was going to be integral in making this one-shot successful. But now we're going to go to the adventure proper. Like you've got everything that surrounds your adventure, but we play Dungeons and Dragons, right? So you want to dive into the dungeon, and that could be literal, or that could be metaphorical. So the very first thing you come across in an adventure in a dungeon in your one shot is the entrance.
Exactly. So after our adventurers have made their way through the festival, all the new players have gotten a little more comfortable with rolling, using their character sheet skills, saving throws, and so now they're ready to jump into the dungeon. And they make their way to the entrance. The entrance is your chance as a DM to really set the ambiance and tone of your dungeon. You don't want to make it too complicated. Maybe a locked door that the rogue has to pick, a puzzle or two, some odds and ends that they can look into that might give them some insight onto what lies further beyond. And for our dungeon, we decided to go with a pretty simple entrance. And to explain that, Boulder?
Yeah, so after they get done with their events and they witness the kobolds riding off with their reward, the adventurers then travel to the windmill. So in this case, we kind of took the dungeon and changed it to this. Very simple kind of thing. It can just a windmill with a large overgrown garden, simple iron wrought gate to a rotted windmill as you walk and crest a hill. And your adventurers are there at maybe they see the actual wagon that was being pulled, so they have confirmation that, hey, this is actually where they're meant to be.
Yeah, and this is your opportunity as a DM to kind of wax poetic and show off your aspect of storytelling. To this point, you and your players are telling a collaborative story, and you've kind of set up the framework. But especially if you love writing, or if you just love oratory, this is your moment to really set the tone for your dungeon. This is the very first step that they're going to come across. And actually, Salem is very, very good at this. We all play together, and we all also have our own tables that we run. And Salem, you are so good at setting tone and painting that picture for me as a player.
I really appreciate that. It's taken me a long time to get to that point, and I think I'd like to bring that up while we're here. If you're a new DM, or even if you're an old DM and you're just not, that you don't have a lot of time to write, or you don't have a lot of time or experience put into Dungeons and Dragons, don't be afraid to keep things basic. I mean, your players, by and large, that you're getting that are new are going to be very accepting of what you've prepared for them, I've found. But yeah, I mean, it's all about, everybody has to bring something to the table. Otherwise it's going to really bog down for everybody. But that being said, the entrance in the 5-room dungeon system, it's the reason why the dungeon hasn't been disturbed so far. So if you were to think about like an ancient temple or something like that, what's kept the grave robbers out so far? Why did nobody in Raiders of the Lost Ark? Why did nobody in the Raiders of the Lost Ark pilfer that golden idol from the dungeon? Well, because there was spike traps, and you'll see that skeleton put up in that spike trap. You know what I mean? It's stuff like that. But yeah, no, and that's another good example. I mean, that sets the tone for that dungeon pretty well. There are deadly traps here. It's scary, it's dark, but it's trap-based as well. It is not a bunch of little critters running around. Your entrance, I think, should reflect that pretty heavily. So if you're going to make like an ancient tomb, don't use a lot of like critters or anything. I mean, you can use like spiders and maybe the undead at some point for sure, but don't have a lot of like alive things if you're going to set the tone with a big, monolithic entity that sits there and asks you riddles, because it wouldn't make sense for kobolds to have made it past that point, generally speaking, unless they have a side entrance. But that's all stuff you got to figure out in later sections.
Lord George, when you're writing an entrance, what do you like? What is your process? What do you like to do when you're really painting a picture for players?
For me personally, it's all about sensory effects when you're walking into the entrance of a dungeon. I'm currently DMing an Out of the Abyss campaign. Everything's deep underground. It's all dark or dim lighting. You can enter an underground temple that's been there for thousands of years, and there's just some musty smell that comes over everyone, the smell of decay and death. You want to give your players all those sensory effects. So I always start with sensory effects, and then move into specifics in the entrance afterwards.
And something every story is woven with many threads, and two threads that cannot be separated is your entrance and your gatekeeper. Lord George, would you like to dive into that?
Right, for sure. And this Salem touched on this. This is what separates the townspeople from the adventurers. Who's willing to brave the spike traps or the blow dart traps. And we've come up with something a little different for ours. Boulder.
We got in true Kobold fashion. They are very chaotic, weird little creatures. We came up with a system where basically there's Kobold sitting on top of this windmill with a giant slingshot, effectively, where he can sling down any numerous things that this little guy has found, whether it be bugs, hornets' nests, skunks that he's caught, a random squirrel. Whatever this dude has, he's hucking it down at your adventurers just to try to thwart them and get them to leave this windmill.
Yeah, so your gatekeeper and your entrance, they don't necessarily have to be separate. We have them in separate sections, just in case, because D&D is a thing where you tell your own story. So you could walk through the door and suddenly there's an old man and he has many a riddle for you. And that's your entrance and your gatekeeper. But you can put them together. Yeah, go ahead, Salem.
Yeah, I was about to say I'd like to kind of double back on what I'd brought up before, bringing up the Ark of the Covenant Golden Idol thing. I was using the spike trap as an establishment of tone, but in that sense, yes, that is also the gatekeeper. And that is a conscious decision you have to make. Is the gatekeeper part of the entrance, or you can use a whole room, I would say, to really establish the tone, like Lord George was saying. If you're going to enter that tomb, or you're going to, pilfer that crypt or whatever, storm the castle, you get those sensory effects out there, because as the DM, you are the eyes, ears, nose, taste buds, and whatever the other two senses I'm missing are. You are the world that the players are perceiving, in the sense that you're providing those details. So if you want to put clues as to what might live there or anything like that, that's what the entrance is for. That being said, the gatekeeper does not necessarily have to be a part of that entrance right away. It can enter in maybe as they're exploring the entrance. If it's some sort of creature, it can be the door separating the entrance from the rest of the dungeon, that sort of thing. The gatekeeper doesn't necessarily have to be a big statue guardian that the players beat up and destroy. It can be a lot of different things, and it also works based on the tone of the dungeon that you're setting. In our case, we picked kobolds, I think because kobolds in our head are goofy little, wackos that really fit with the jovial setting that we had going on so far. Kobolds like traps and mechanical things, so we thought slingshot full of funny things. I think to expand on what we have so far, I would actually probably roll up, if I had the time, like a table, roll a d8. What does he fire at you out of the slingshot? So you could be like, okay, he throws mud at you, he throws a scorpion at you, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the gatekeeper, while the entrance is there for tone, the gatekeeper is why has this place not been pilfered so far, is what I meant to say before.
And so far, everything that we've explored, everything that we've used in our own exploration of our worksheet has been setting an expectation. That's part of storytelling, is that you're setting an expectation. You don't want your story to be confusing for players. You want to give them a sense of direction. But the most fun thing that you can do with adventures is turn that expectation on its head. Let's talk about the twist, Lord George.
Right. You set the expectation. All the players they know that the kobolds are stealing their wine. Just kobolds like wine. We like wine and gold. We're kobolds. It's your job here after building all that expectation to build suspense on top of it. Give them the obvious answer, make them feel safe in their heads, and then, like my dad said, just turn it upside down, twist. The lich that's destroying the town. It's because it's on a giant well of Fanta orange soda, and he really likes Fanta orange soda, which is why he destroyed the whole town. That's not what we went with, but we went
I like it though.
But
He just
by the
likes
gods, I wish we had.
Oh man.
So,
We
Boulder, can you talk a little bit about our choice? Yeah.
our choice specifically with these kobolds, we decided that they were beholden to a version to them, a god, who has been encouraging them to rid the world of its vices, which this wine falls into for these this halfling village. This god is not actually a god, surprise, but he's actually a stray who just really, really wants and likes this wine from this particular halfling village, and has been exploiting these kobolds to get his fill.
Yeah, I love this one so much because when you think about kobolds, and this again breaking an expectation. When you think about kobolds, they're mostly just like they're playful and they're inventive and just general, not nuisances, but they can be, but they don't usually have very serious motivations. Whereas like we took the idea of kobolds and they almost have like an oath, like a paladin oath. They're like, we're going to rid the world of its vices, but actually they themselves have been tricked by this false god. This we chose a satyr because we thought the imagery would be like closely associated with wine. Usually it's like Bacchus and things from Greco-Roman mythology. So we thought that fit very well.
Yeah, and I think another thing to kind of add on here, people are going to see kobolds and they're immediately going to think dragon. But if you look at the kobolds in the monster manual, if you're really going to go off the traditionalist just monster manual, which you don't have to, they really kind of latch onto anybody in a position of power over them, anybody that can kind of elevate their status. So this satyr tricking a bunch of kobolds, I don't think that's that out of character. And also satyr, going off of the themes, tying it all back to that initial word, is like a puckish, fun character that could be causing mischief, and that's what this is. This is mischief in the form of a misdemeanor at most. You know what I mean? Unless you want the kobolds to have killed people, and we could bump it up to a felony. But as it stands right now, I think the satyr just is like a fun kind of idea, that the kobolds will talk about the horned one that lives in the woods or whatever. It doesn't, like, it could, that's a fun image, you know what I mean? And maybe the players will go, are we really about to fight a dragon at level 1? And you could build that suspense just to have it be ruined later. But the twist in totality is just there. You don't have to subvert their expectations in a way that is so mind-wrenching or, possibly expected that you were just going to bring a twist anyways. The twist doesn't have to be a twist for the narrative as a whole, even. It could just be a twist centered in the dungeon itself. But it should be there to add some sort of dramatic flair, at least. I think it could be another word for it. Just something to really kind of bring in the character of this dungeon, bring in the essence of this adventure. And we thought that having them give the wine to this guy because they were tricked really kind of fit with the fun themes that we were having so far.
Lord George. I love saying your name, Lord George.
Me
so when you're
too.
thinking about when you're thinking about this twist, we all have our different kind of perspectives of why we think this twist is so effective and fun. What do you think about it?
I really liked it. Kobolds on their own already are so going with the theme of jovial, a little bit of comedy mixed in there. Everyone loves it. Oh no, just my name's Rimrock, but I'm not here for the gold. I'm just here. Everyone loves kobold voices. That was a really bad one, but for new players in a one shot, you can never go wrong with kobolds, and twisting them into just a god, they being beholden to a god is a great way to do it.
I never want to hear you talk bad about Rimrack again, by the way, because I'm hopelessly in love with this character you've created already.
It's always the kobolds.
It's always the kobolds.
Always the kobolds.
Rimrack.
Be careful. If you introduce a kobold, your characters will
Your players
try
have a
to tame
new
them.
son or daughter.
Yeah, and you're gonna be the one who role plays this kobold or has to accommodate the kobold in combat. So you set yourself up for any kind of misery that you're gonna face in the future.
Don't make them too cute.
You have been warned. Okay, so we've talked all about this adventure and the themes and the different aspects that make up a really good session. But you do have to bring it to a head. It's all about that boss.
You gotta have a good boss fight in a one shot. It's the staple of one shots. It's really hard at level 1. I find it to be one of my most challenging parts of building a low level one shot is just scaling the fight for them, and in order to make it balanced but still challenging. You don't want to kill the 6 HP wizard, but there's always the chance of one-shotting him no matter what you're playing with. And I think going with the satyr was a good choice for us. How did we decide on that boulder?
Well, obviously, you're going to find out from these kobolds that the horned one in the woods has been tasking them. And so then the obvious thing, go confront him, see who this horned one is. Maybe there's a code word that these kobolds had that brings out this satyr, and he obviously has a very embellished display that he puts on to show that his godly might. Maybe he just has a simple light spell placed on a rock or something behind him to make himself seem epic as he, exits. This doesn't have to be a confrontational fight. They can, obviously, if they show up here and they're just like, we hate this guy, we're just going to kill him, that is a thing that they can do. Or they can take the more political route.
Yeah, and even if your expectation as a DM, because when you're going through, you kind of envision a story in your head, but when you come to the final boss fight and your players want to subvert the idea that you had initially, our recommendation is always to just roll with it, because oftentimes you're going to come up with a story that's better than what you thought. And excuse me. And you also, that's what D&D is. It's a collaborative story. And so if you try to put up like a roadblock as far as like, no, they're going to fight this guy, or no, they have to solve all my riddles in exactly the way that I want them to solve them, then you're going to create a little bit of contention, I think, at the table. And you don't want that. You want to facilitate a good, fun, kind of continuous experience. And that's going to motivate your players to come back. And so, and that's with every aspect of the game. Everything we've talked about, I think that ideology fits. But especially with a big boss. If they don't want to kill your big boss, if they want to befriend them and, help them buy the local pizzeria and become the master pizza chef they've always wanted to be, yeah, why not? That's fun. And then you have opened the opportunity for using that character as an NPC in the future. Or, there are so many things that not being so stuck in your ways or stuck in your own story, there's so many things that if you don't do that, it creates a more fun environment. So.
Yeah. And that being said, it is always fun, especially after the players have raffle stomped a cohort of kobolds in their windmill, that they're going to have the bloodlust and they're going to want to go in there and beat the ever-loving snot out of this satyr. And, I mean, that can be fine. I think the reason I pitched that the satyr would not be in the windmill itself, the players are probably going to be drained pretty heavily on hit points by the time they're done with kobolds. People tend to underestimate kobolds, but with pack tactics, can really whittle down a couple level 1 players. So having the option of like going out into the woods later to confront him when they've restocked and everything, that's a nice choice. And it could also give them that time to calm down, tell the satyr to buzz off or whatever. I think in level 1, having the solution be a social encounter to a boss battle is a great idea. Just because, they're low on resources. Even a satyr has a good chance of TPKing if you give him the pipes variant, where he can like put people to sleep and stuff. That could thwart a good portion of the party right away if they don't pass those, I want to say, wisdom checks. But yeah, no. So the boss, in video game terms, is generally going to be a person that you're confronting physically and violently, usually, and that's good in a lot of sense. Like, that is D&D. You go in, you kick down the door, you beat up the bad guy, you go home with the stuff. But I mean, especially early on or in a one-shot, it can be really fun to talk to this character to figure out what his motivations are, even if it's before they raffle stomp him or get raffle stomped. So, and yeah, I just think the satyr is a fun one because with its charisma and its like performance ability and stuff, it can be a chance to really kind of let loose as a role player, and as a table of role players. But it also opens up the opportunity to have some cool combat in there for level 1. And that is, level 1 is a place where, especially if you're a new DM, you see all the shiny stat blocks, you see all the cool badass orcs and stuff like that, and you're going to go, yeah, I'm going to put all this in there, and it's going to be okay. It probably won't be. It probably won't be okay. Save that stuff for like level 3, you know what I mean? Save it for like levels 2 and 3 if you want to start doing that stuff. Just really...
But what if you only kill one character?
Yeah. Well,
not the worst thing in the world.
Not the worst thing in the world. At level 1...
As long as it's the paladin of cleric.
Yeah. At level 1, it really depends on your group. This does all come back to you got to know your table. If you're playing with a table of totally new people, I would say probably stick away from killing someone unless you know that they're going to take it all right. But new players are generally either going to be very detached from their characters or going to be very attached to their characters, depending on how invested they are in playing Dungeons and Dragons. If they're your cousin that your mom forced to play with you, you can probably Goomba stomp them. You might have to incur the wrath of your mother later. But if it's, your lifelong best friend who has just expressed an interest to you, I'd probably lowball it. You know what I mean? Yeah, I don't know.
So we've come fisticuffs with the boss, or we've fulfilled a deep set desire that they themselves didn't even know they had, and we provided it for them. We've resolved the conflict with the big bad in a certain way. Let's talk about rewards.
Oh yeah, it's time. It's finally time. Magic items, gold, and the glorious XP that every level 1 character desires. Luckily, building a one-shot, you have a lot more freedom with rewards because you don't have to worry about them using them after the one shot or needing to use them. If you're building a first session, you have to think about it a little more. You don't want to give them the Vorpal sword at level 1. So yeah, luckily for us, we built a one shot, and so we didn't need to give them gold to buy rations. Instead, we gave them something much more important.
So what we kind of went with, you can kind of give them pretty much whatever uncommon magic item you see fit. That you're looking through the DMG and you're just like, I like this one because it looks cool and it's uncommon, you could probably give it to them. They're level 1. It's not going to be that crazy. We decided to give them likely a wand if there is a spellcaster. It's always fun as a spellcaster to get like a wand of magic missiles or something of the like. And then obviously, if they have the kobolds have whatever on them, the satyr has what his spear, maybe he has his pipes. Those are going to be things that they can pick up. They can loot the body of whatever they defeat and take whatever was there.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Tie your reward into your story, because you could give magic items if you just want to reward them and give them something cool that they can use after. Let's say your boss battle is the last thing you do, then they can use something like, I don't know, a wand of smiles, and then now suddenly they bring the kobolds back in chains and they make them smile and dance all along the way. It's actually a little bit sadistic, but we won't talk about that.
Beautiful.
Yeah,
We're a bunch of evildoers over here.
Yeah,
that was absolutely
reformed.
I suppose.
But your reward also, it doesn't have to be something that's necessarily useful. Your reward should also be like, hey, they got all the wine back, and that is their reward too. Is that making it appropriate to your story is going to make it feel more natural, not like you just pulled up some table and rolled the d20. You know what I mean? So
I agree.
Yeah.
And something I like to do with one shots, I run a campaign, and sometimes when players can't make it to a session, I have a one shot in my back pocket, and I'm ready to throw it out there. I like as a reward for the players, it's not as much for the characters. Sometimes the player characters in the one shot will become a legend in the campaign that they hear about later on. Can do fun stuff like that mixes with different stories. I really enjoy that type of reward as well for players in one shots.
I agree. I think you got to be careful, not to be the bearer of bad news, but I have been the victim many a time of overbloating my party with magic items or gold, and it just completely thwarted everything in the adventure. I mean, they could just do anything they wanted whenever they wanted with no moral or legal repercussion whatsoever, or cosmic repercussion whatsoever, basically.
It's easy to do.
Don't be afraid to give them magic items, but, dial it back. If you're going to do more sessions after this, don't be afraid to just feed them, like drip feed them every once in a while. Here's a little magic item. And don't give too much gold either. I think a good thing to keep in mind with this one, and this is a good precedent, 2 different types of rewards in this adventure. You get the wine, the unlimited wine. That's the village's reward basically, and the villagers could offer a reward to them on top of this to thwart, but keep it small. And then anything they find in the dungeon itself. That's a good precedent for a lot of quests that you're going to give your players. Is you've got the quest giver's reward, and the players are generally going to have impunity to take anything that they find along the way. So keep that in mind also when designing boss battles. If you make your boss battle a wizard and you give him a wand of polymorph, you better have a dang good reason why the players aren't going to be having that wand of polymorph, or else everything that you ever throw at them after that is going to be transformed into like a frog. It's just but in this case, the rewards are simple. We did say a wand would be a good thing to just have in their stash, and I agree with that. But keep it relevant to the players as well. It wouldn't be very fun if the party is a group of a fighter, a wizard, and a cleric if you're just handing out druid items or anything not thematically appropriate to them. Not everything has to be tailor-made to them necessarily. They can find creative solutions with items. But try to keep it somewhat relevant, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Rewards are best when I think when they're appropriate to the story, appropriate to players,
yes,
and you're not oversaturating your rewards. Like you want to have good relationship with your players, but you don't have to feed that relationship with just kind things that you do as a DM, because eventually that's going to get frustrating for you, and it's going to get kind of boring for them,
Mhm.
honestly. So we've beaten our boss, we've gotten our reward, we're coming down off our adrenaline high, and let's say you didn't end the story after beating the boss. You've got a kind of a post-action or a wrapping it up kind of aspect to your story. So, Lord George, take it away.
For sure. I mean, the boss lies dead on the floor, or you found a civil way to end the encounter. Either way, what happens now with our heroes? What do they? Does it just boop? Story ends right there. Roll the credits? No, you got to do something for them. I've had a player who decided that his wizard was going to sequester himself until the demon lords arose once again, and heroes of the future could call upon him. Our heroes of our one shot get something a little more fun to do, but yeah.
Yeah, so for this, obviously, a comeback heroic with the oodles of wine that they were promised. The halflings joyously are celebrating. They came back, they defeated the kobolds, they got the wine. Maybe they even, for funsy, they name a new wine after the party or one of the characters, just to have that little bit of a cool little tinge in there to really solidify the characters into your world.
And this is such a great opportunity to let your players tell you their perspective of the story. You just to expand a little bit on the thing that we created. Let's say they find themselves back at the inn. They're celebrating. They're drinking this new vintage of wine that is their namesake, and they're sitting at the table and they all lock eyes and wow, that was something really special. And they start talking about their experience as players, and that can kind of bleed as characters, and that can bleed into how the players experienced it. You're giving them an opportunity to speak about their experience, and that's going to be the kind of the final step in them feeling like they've been telling a story, not just experiencing a story.
I totally agree.
And that's important because two things that I think are something. It's something that's looked over a lot of times. One, as a DM, you are a player too. You're not just a facilitator, and so this is your opportunity to get feedback. And as a DM, that can be a certain kind of reward because they can say, "Hey, um, you know, as a player, as a character, I found this really enriching. I think you did this very well." Or your character, in character, they may have come to some sort of realization, and their character grew from that. So you get good feedback. And the second thing that I think is looked over um, this is another opportunity to allow your players to dictate the story being told, because you can railroad them into being like, well, this is how the story ends. No, you're letting them contribute to that too, and that's what the whole post action I think is all about. Is that it's the coming together. It's the nice family moment at the end, or it doesn't have to be. Let's say someone died. I think one of the best scenes. So I'm a huge Lord of the Rings fan. After Gandalf falls in the mines of Moria, and the whole party thinks that he has fallen to his doom. And you get that line, give them a moment for pity's sake. That's so powerful because they do need that moment. They saw their mentor, their friend, their loved one fall to their death, or so they think. It's not spoilers. The movie and the books have been out for decades.
So
How dare
Yeah.
you?
Right. But yeah, that moment is so impactful because they are allowed to live in their drama and their sadness, and that's what the post action can also be. They can live in their sadness. It doesn't always have to be happy.
I agree. So I think we've hit most of the items that we have in our worksheet. We skipped over a lot of the formatting and decision making that went into creating our one shot. So I just wanted to go over that with everybody. So the way our worksheet is formatted, would anyone like to describe the worksheet?
Sure, yeah, and this is going to be publicly available. I will give a disclaimer, we do not own anything. We are not affiliates of Dungeons & Dragons. We are avid fans and former dungeon villains. And so we are sharing with this. It is public domain and free for all people to use. And we want you to use it if you find it useful. So just as far as the formatting itself, and I'll let my compatriots dive in deeper, but we have the larger elements first, because we find it easier to distill down. And then you have the large elements: theme, setting, hook, starting location, catalyst, logistics. And then we dive into the adventure proper. So then you can get to the finer details. And then on the worksheets itself too, and we'll explore this more later, we take each section and we really, really talk about it and give you some of our thoughts too. So you'll see that in the publication.
Right, and creating this in the actual adventure section, it was the first time that I had actually been introduced to the 5-room dungeon system. Salem, can you explain the 5-room dungeon system for us?
Yeah, of course. The 5-room dungeon system is basically just a skeletal framework for the kind of bare necessities of a dungeon. It's just one I found when I was browsing online. I don't know the source off the top of my head, and I dread tabbing away at this moment because I will lose recording of the visuals. But yeah, it's just the concept that, I mean, there's certain elements to what make a dungeon a dungeon. It doesn't even necessarily have to be skeletons and evil sorcerers and all that. A dungeon can be anywhere, almost. A dungeon can be a house. A dungeon can be a place of business. It can be anywhere. But what
Corporate dungeon.
A corporate dungeon. But what makes
The worst kind.
Yeah. But what makes a dungeon is primarily these elements. It's the entrance, aka basically the theme and the setting of the dungeon is what the entrance is going to encompass. It's the tone setter, the guardian, which is the protector, or i.e. the reason that the dungeon has not been defiled up until this point. Or, if you want to kind of get kind of crazy with it, if you remove that element, for instance, and kind of establish like that the guardian has been defeated and that there might be someone in here ahead of them, that in and of itself could be part of the entrance, and then you could later introduce a new guardian, someone that has taken the place, a lookout for a group of bandits that are pilfering this ruins currently, that sort of thing. I'm just freeballing here. The twist, which is whatever room you have set up that the theme kind of comes into being, and you're like, oh shit, that's what we're doing here. Oh man, we've been tricked, or something like that. Beans, the old man of the village sent us here, and dang, he wants the genie lamp, you know what I mean? That's right. He's not that nice and not that old. Then there's the boss battle. There's the boss battle, which is the kind of culminating event, generally in the form of combat. Doesn't have to be. Could be they have to figure out a puzzle in a certain amount of time. It could be any sort of stuff. Just the final guardian, basically, of the dungeon. And then the reward, which is self-explanatory. What are you giving the party? What do they get out of this? How do they know they didn't waste their time and just fulfill your egomaniacal ramblings for the past 4 hours that you've been playing or whatever? But yes, that's can be done in 5 rooms, is what the concept really boils down to. Of course, shockingly, there are dungeons that are more than 5 rooms. And what you could do with that is you can set those up. I know, you can set those up in a number of ways. You can have multiple entrances. The entrance itself can mean different wings of the dungeon. So if you're doing kind of like a Legend of Zelda style thing, where you could be like, yeah, there's a challenge and a mini boss over that way, and a challenge and a mini boss over that way, and you need to beat those to open up this door. those are like little tiny dungeons within your dungeon, and you can kind of use those to that effect. A good use of twist can be introducing a mechanic in the dungeon. So if you want something to be done to the boss, like crystals that make the undead servants in the room quasi-invincible until they've been dismantled or destroyed, set that up early. Set that up early so that the party gets into the boss room and they're like, okay, we know what that is. We can work with that, so that when they beat the boss and he reforms immediately, they're like, well, yeah, okay, our suspicions are confirmed. Let's look for that magic crystal. You know what I mean? But yeah, so not to ramble too much, the 5-room dungeon is really just there as like a basic framework for a small dungeon, and you can expand and rearrange and change it however works for you. But it's the bare necessities of what you're going to want to put in there.
And that's really what we wanted to give with this product. Is we wanted to give the basic elements for you to utilize and tell your story. We are going to expound more on these things in later short form videos, and we'll continue to put out this kind of stuff because we have a passion for dungeon craft, and you know, our methods and means may be a little bit nefarious, but ultimately we want to help people out, and we want to share our experiences too because we love what we do so much. So I think this would be a good point to wrap it up. And we're going to, like I said, we're going to publish this. It's going to be in the link below. All things, we are not infringing on copyright. It is all public domain, free for you to use. And yeah, we're just dungeon crafters that just love doing wicked things and help people out, as counterintuitive as that might be. So thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time and your consideration. We are the Dungeon Mancers.